Welcome to another episode of the Bhandwagon podcast, and today is a bit of a milestone for me. It's a person who's played a very significant part in terms of my knowledge of Bhangra and getting involved in, like, I can't even call this media because he does proper stuff in it. Mine is just like Cardigal, whatever, it's in bedroom stuff, right? He when you think of UK Bhangra and you think of even World Bhangra on radio, this guy he's interviewed them all, and he is the UK voice, I could categorically say, of UK Panjabi Bhangra and folk music. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to Poli Tank. Welcome, Poli.
Rick, thank you. Well, thanks for having me on your podcast. But that's a very, very big intro you just gave me there, bro. Sounded very, very big, and I was just thinking then for a minute, I wonder who he's going to interview.
you know what? I was actually thinking about the intro part because I don't normally think about it, but I was at that point where when I'm doing an introduction to somebody, I try to be over generous in terms of, not in terms of I'm making it up, but I don't think it's elements are part of their career or anything that they've given attention to, so it's been kind of modest. But my brother he had his graduation at Nottingham many years ago.
Yeah.
And it was Michael Parkinson, and he shook his lecturer's hand, and he went up to Michael Parkinson, shook his hand straight away, and he was chuffed to bits. I go, you smashed it. He goes, you think of all the people who he's shaken hands with. Technically, I've just done the same. And I feel that's a bit similar with you because you've interviewed all the greats, everyone past and present to this point. And so to have this kind of like an opportunity to do this gives a real insight, because we don't get to normally hear from the interviewer.
Yeah. No, I get you. And for this, I mean, what you're doing with me now, it feels like a bit of a busman's holiday, to be honest with you.
Because what do you mean? What is a busman's holiday to you? I mean, like,
it's like I'm so used to doing interviews and stuff, so it's kind of like you doing an interview on me. It's kind of like, whoa, hold on a minute, because I always ask questions and wait for answers. Now this is slightly different for me, obviously, because like I said, I don't really get interviewed that often, Rick, because I think people get put off just with the fact that I've been around for so long and I've interviewed so many people, so that I think they get a bit fearful of sort of, I don't know whether it's how do we come across to him, or how do we put questions to him and stuff. And I often say, look, I just ask the questions and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. Try it that way. But no, I really do think sometimes, I mean, it's like you just mentioned Michael Parkinson. I mean, if I had to interview him, I'd probably feel intimidated, thinking all the people he's interviewed in his time, and I would only seem like a very small, bit to him. But trying to interview him, I would really, really have to think hard about, okay, what am I going to ask him, and what sort of questions, and how we're going to sort of move this story on, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would take a lot of thinking and working on, really.
So if you're noticing, Polly's now wearing headphones now, so that's just a bit of kind of backstage behind the scenes footage. Anyway, so I'm just going to kind of disclose at this point that I've met you just before I went to university, and when we were working at Radio XL, and some of the stuff that I kind of learned from you, especially kind of, how do I call it, kind of man management, person management, when you're discussing and you're speaking to artists, was invaluable. And it's something that's kind of crossed over in a lot of my other work that I do. And I want to get to that a little bit later, but I just wanted to put that disclaimer at this point to kind of set the scene of our relationship. But I want to kind of go back to, like, from where did it all start with you, Polly? So how did you get into this scene, especially like, like Derby in that area has got a big Punjabi kind of community at that time, but like it wasn't massive compared to some of the other areas.
No, I've always said we've got a good Punjabi community here in Derby, but it's not as big as, say, Birmingham, Leicester, etc., etc. Wolves, maybe, possibly even Coventry. Yeah, but Birmingham, obviously, if we talk about the Midlands, is the stronghold of where Punjabis really, really are. But here in Derby, I'll be honest, we had a small community, but a lot of us were really, really, I suppose, from an early age, proud of who we were. As Punjabis, as Sikhs. I mean, my early sort of, I'm going back to possibly around about junior school time for myself. I spent a lot of time listening to Bollywood music. We was fortunate enough to have a cinema here that showed films on the weekend. I know Birmingham had, I think, 3 or 4 cinemas where you could go even during the week, but we only had one cinema here that showed films on the weekend. So Saturday, Sunday, mainly Sunday, was a trip out to the cinema. So I was influenced quite heavily by Bollywood in my early sort of days. My brother used to like listening to Panjabi music, so he had some really old school in that era of when they used to have a lot of duet songs, in the very, very early stages of Bhangra music and Panjabi folk music. So he used to listen to a lot of that. And we had a gramophone at home. And when no one was around, I'd be listening to music. That's where my music sort of connection starts. But then where it kind of like, I suppose a little bit at school, it developed as well. I mean, people still laugh at me, but I was part of the school choir because I like singing, and I know people will say, well, what's that? But the fact is I was singing and I was getting out there, and it was like that performing kind of thing. So we was doing, events at school during assembly, we'd be singing. I got into Morris dancing.
What?
So I did Morris dancing as well at school. So I was always kind of like fascinated by, dancing, singing, etc. from a very early age.
Yeah.
As well as football. Football was another passion. But when we was kids, it was football or cricket, because there wasn't no sort of computer games, no nothing then, So on the street, it was football or cricket. Late at night, hide and seek. And that is what we kind of like grew up on. So the music had a lot of influence on me from the early age. But then when you sort of start growing up, you get into your teenage years, you go to a bigger school, it was almost like the Punjabi side, the Indian side of me disappeared, because I went to a school that was far out, from where I'd grown up. And everyone there, the culture and everything was totally different. Very, very westernized. So you had to fit in. And fitting in became such a problem for me because I didn't fit in. But then that's when your realization really starts, is they don't want you there either, but you don't want to be part of them either, but you've got to be there at school. So how do you kind of like, make it work for yourself? But we did in the end. I mean, it's a struggle, but it happens. But the music sort of carried on. I still listened to a lot of Bollywood music, Punjabi music as much as I could, for all those years. At about 14, I actually joined Derby's Juggnu Bhangra group. So I danced Bhangra. In them days, we weren't performing much, but we used to practice once a week.
Yeah.
So there's a local community centre here, Pear Tree Community Centre. We used to go there. We'd have the upstairs, and we used to practice our routine. Every week we would practice our routine. The doll player was his true school's Chacha. He was our doll player. So that was a bit of a connection. His name was Ranjit. Sadly, no longer with us, but that was my sort of early connection with people like Ranjit, dancing, and the Bhangra sort of music. Later on in my life, I moved to London for a few years, where I sort of experienced, when I went there, I mean, the Punjabi music scene here in the Midlands was still fairly quiet. We had your bands like Pachungi, Satis, who were sort of on the wedding circuit.
Yeah.
And then all the shows were happening sort of local community centres or in a school hall or something like that. Yeah, there was no big posh venues. But then when I went to London and we sort of went out, and the first time I saw a LARP live was in like a college. So the venue was slightly different, the atmosphere was slightly different, and it just felt different, and it felt really good to be part of that. And then in London at that time, there was a lot of Asian sound people, like our executive sounds. There was loads of sort of Asian DJs around, and if any party you went to, there'd be an Asian DJ mixing his music as well as doing a bit of Punjabi, doing dance music and stuff. So it kind of like, you're thinking, wow, this is good sound, because you'd hear some of them like mixing Punjabi with a little bit.
What year are we talking about here, Polly? If we have to kind of drill it down,
talking about 84, 85 time, right?
Yeah.
And then 1985, things really, really changed all of a sudden. There was a show at the Empire Ballroom, Leicester Square, which featured a LARP, and they just had their house DJ at the Empire Ballroom. But that was probably one of the biggest shows at the time. It must have been you're talking about 2,500, 3,000 people there, easy, because Empire Ballroom was a big, big venue. So we went along to that. Yeah, and it was just felt, to have 2,500, 3,000 people watching an Asian band playing in a sort of English mainstream venue, very, very sort of unusual. But we loved it, thoroughly enjoyed it. A few weeks later, after that, Chirag Bachchan and Hira played at the Hippodrome, Leicester Square. Yeah, I had to go there as well just to experience the Hippodrome.
So how at that time, just to kind of take me back to this one bit in terms of how were the gigs at that time? Like, you've been involved quite heavy on the gig scene, professionally and privately and that as well. But like, how would they kind of advertise those gigs? Because I'm sure it weren't easy at that time, even though they were getting big results coming in. Was it more word of mouth, or was it actual?
Rick, from the early days, I mean, if you went into Southall, those were the days when sort of billboarding was allowed. Yeah, the councils didn't object to it, so you would literally, as soon as someone put a gig together, they'd plaster it all over the walls in Southall, the East End of London, wherever. There was less sort of hand flyers then. So it was everything. So and the other thing is we had loads of music shops then selling Asian music. So they would all advertise it, and they'd all be selling tickets. So if you lived in Southall, or I don't know, in the East End, Ilford, East Ham, West Ham, that they would be absolutely plastered. They would also target, obviously, universities straight away. So universities would be targeted, and so these sort of posters would be up in maybe the common room or a notice board or whatever. So you just get one person to go into a university, just stick them up, and no one really objected in them days, Rick. I mean, I remember every gig I sort of ever knew about was always plastered on a wall somewhere, or a board, or a music shop, and there was like none of these hand flyers or anything. So that was it. There'd be one big poster. You'd get your information from there. You'd go in, buy your ticket.
What time the coaches are leaving?
Well, coaches came a little bit later. But in London, obviously, you can imagine in London, if you're targeting East London and West London, and the Asian communities in that, you're going to get a crowd, aren't you? Yeah.
A lot more organised down in London than it was in terms of kind of like Midlands, because of the infrastructure, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and plus, like you said, the infrastructure made it a lot easier for people to get around. There was already night buses, things like that were already there. So even if it was a late night, you're just going to get a night bus home, to wherever you needed to go to. So there was already a lot there. But it was, so those two gigs were the first. And the first time I ever saw executive sounds perform was at the Hippodrome. Yeah, and this guy, he was mixing it all up, mashing loads of sound. and stuff. And it was kind of like mind blowing to think, you know, it is even now sometimes when I think about it and say Hippodrome, because that time Hippodrome was such a mainstream club. Yeah. And normally when you sort of talked about Hippodrome, you would see stars go in there and big kind of, I don't know, public figures and stuff. That's the type of club it was. So when we ended up there, it was just like, wow, I can remember going to the gents down there, Rick, man, it was out this world. It was like a restaurant. You know what I'm saying? So you kind of like sitting there thinking, wow, you know, they live in a totally different world from where we've been in. But as for the gig, it was absolutely awesome. And the best thing that I ever remember about the Hippodrome is they had a stage that dropped. It just sank to the dance floor level. Yeah, when the DJ was on. But when the bands were on, the stage would come up, the middle of the stage would go down, and the band would just appear on it.
Wow.
So it was like,
you can't beat that stage production now.
No. And then, right, I said, after the bands had finished, the whole thing just went down and it became a dance floor. And that's when the Executive Sounds took over. He was, like I said, blaring out some massive, massive sounds from back then. And that's when I thought, wow, this guy's, gosh, he's brilliant. He's amazing, you know? And then it was kind of, I wouldn't say straight away, I was thinking, yeah, you know, I want to get into this. It was just like, wow, that's amazing. He's brilliant. This guy, I love him. I didn't meet Sanj then. I didn't know him at all, but I knew of him then. And then that was it. He came back. And then, so after going to them two big gigs, it was just kind of like digesting all that information. And where do we go now? And what's going to happen next? And then from there on, it was almost like an explosion of bands, nightclubs, Asian DJs. And so you're talking about 85, 86 bang. I remember 1986 meeting Manjeet Gondal, Holly, in my local in Southall. I'd got to know his brother. He had a younger brother called Shindar. Sadly, he's passed away as well. So he was a good friend of mine. And he always used to tell me, said, oh, you know, my brother sings. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, he sings. And I goes, anything? He goes, oh, yeah, he used to play double R with the Larp. And I was like, so why has he stopped? He goes, he wants to like pursue his singing career. So one night, he brought his brother down to the pub. We was there, and he said, oh, I've just recorded an album, and I've got a cassette. Do you want to have a quick listen? So we hopped in his car. That's the first time I heard Holly. Yeah, but then when you heard that stereo effect of Holly,
that's the bit that catches you as you first start, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're like, wow. And I was like, who's produced this? And there was like Deepak Khazanchi, and I was like, who?
Yeah.
And they're like, Deepak, have you not heard of him? So, no, not a name I really know, but it's magic. This is awesome. When's it coming out? And he gave me a date and stuff. And then, you know, Holly was a new band, 1986, came out with the album. That album that one song just blew up the album for him, Holly. And from that's where he got his band, because before he just wanted to be Manjeet Gondal. But because of the song Holly, he automatically, wherever people, it's Holly. Ever, no one ever knew him as Manjeet. It was always, oh, that's Holly. Yeah, and that was it. And that name stuck with him. So his band was then, became Holly. But that's where that kind of like explosion started from. Then come 1986, I returned to Derby, came back here, had a friend of mine. We was best friends. So I came back to him and I says, you know what, while I was in London, I saw this DJ and he was just, and I knew my mate, he had a relative in his family who had like the old DJ systems. They were like twin deck.
Yeah.
Just two speakers.
Two big speakers.
Yeah. So I said to him, I says, you're, I said, he's got a turntable thing, hasn't he? I goes, do you think you'd be interested in like selling it or maybe even loaning it to us? And he was like, oh, why? What we're gonna? I goes, look, you like your dance music, all the pop music and everything. I like all the Panjabi music, so it'd be a good combination. That's what's happening in London. We get a couple of decks, we just go out and we start doing like some small parties and stuff, and that's where the DJ sort of thing started from.
So you you've obviously experienced London, and then you've gone, and then you've already you've kind of seen that innovation in terms of like there's a potential market in there. You fall in love with the genre. You've seen it explode. You can see the next kind of stages that you are. I'm guessing, like, I did an interview with Sardar Gill, and he was talking about, you know, by '86 in terms of what albums and what was being produced, and he's given a real good kind of vision of what the sound was like in the Midlands, especially. And you know, you've just given us a great one there in terms of London, which perspective that I've never heard before. You're then taking it back into another even tighter niche in terms of that way in kind of East Midlands now. And then how did you then, like, you've had that discussion with your mate, you're going to do this and that. The next stages are kind of like where you're going to go back out. And then is the introduction of kind of spoken media come in at that bit, or is it still further down the line?
Asian music on BBC was they already had shows, Asian shows. They were all kind of like very. I mean, I think from possibly about the '70s, late '70s, there was always sort of Asian programs, but the shows were very just targeting Asian audiences, so they were very rigid in what they did, and they did it all in mother tongue. So their style of presenting would be, you know, very sort of Aaj Ka Geet hai, ye main Rik ke naam kar raha hoon, ye geet hai is film se, ye kalakar hai. So that kind of a style,
you
know, and that kind of like connected with our first generations that came here, because I think and I don't quote me, but I think that was a kind of style that came from India anyway, of presenting radio. So first generation, they loved that. And then obviously come into the 80s a little bit, there was a second generation. You know, things were moving on. Here in BBC, there was an opportunity in about 1982 they wanted to have like a youth program for Asian people, for Asian, you know. And so they started off like a community radio on BBC for Asians, and they created a forum. And out of that forum, they found 4 or 5 presenters that they thought sort of represented the youth. And so they came along and they kind of like changed the way the program was presented. They changed the music sort of sense, in the sense that is they would concentrate on the latest music rather than, you know, some of the older music.
The old school, yeah.
Old school Bollywood, the old school Panjabi. So that kind of like changed. So in 1982, BBC Radio Derby had an Asian program that was run by sort of young people with young ideas, and it was targeting the younger audience. So we already had that 82. I'm not sure about whether Birmingham or...
Because I only, you know, like I was born in 82, so I was like, I remember going, especially late 80s, listen to a lot of pirate radio stations. Apna Radio used to be one that is, and like it depended on which part of the house that you could get the frequency. And even to the point when we used to listen to Aaj Kal on a Friday, we used to be like have it really finely tuned in on in our kitchen. And in fact, we actually my mum won a competition to get a signed DCS shirt, which was I think, I don't know if the top's still around, but I think it was 1, 2, 3. It was like all Shin and everyone was there with what the band picked. It was an extra large t-shirt.
So, I think in them days they only did one size.
And like all the band members signed it. So I wish I've got to dig that out. You know, I've got to find that out. But it was such as like in terms of like growing up, listening to your radio station on a Friday, for example, became such a staple part of the diet of listening to music, because that innovation of you weren't getting that anywhere else. That was definitely just like the one place. But did you apply to be one of those, or did they find you to be one of those voices?
It's funny because one of the guys who was selected to start that radio was a guy called Nicky Baines, and we had kind of like in the area grown up together. Nicky and myself. Nicky was also part of the Bhangra band, dance
group.
Jugna group. He was part of that. He was another guy that was very much into sort of his culture. He loved Bollywood films. So he'd actually got a place on in 1982 as part of this sort of pilot that BBC was running. But in 1986, when I came back from London, I came. You imagine me, I'm buzzing with just having gone to the Empire, the Hippodrome. I've got this kind of like London vibe going on with me. There's this underground sort of dance music that was around at the time as well. But there was a lot of Punjabi releases around. So by the time I came back to Derby, you got to think people like Brimmy had released a couple of albums by then. Hira, Chirag Pehchan, obviously Alap had an album out. Apna Sangeet were about to release their album. Holi Holi had an album out. Kalapreet had an album out. So all of a sudden, from like waiting for one maybe band or two bands to release, and if you got a release every 6 months, you was happy. All of a sudden, you had a bit of a collection going. And as I was getting into my sort of roadshow and stuff, my collection started growing of Punjabi vinyl.
I just want to I just want to make a checkpoint at this bit.
Yeah.
Poli Tank is one of the biggest record collections of UK Panjabi folk music you would ever see in your life. Honest, I think you've got the biggest possibly in the UK.
I don't know. I think there's one or two guys.
I remember you used to bring it into the station.
Yeah,
and they used to spray them there because I remember you used to say, "Oh, Vic, I've got to do in the downtime in between you were like just cleaning them, and it used to be an annual event that you'd have to go down into your kind of basement area where you had it your storage and clean it."
Rick, I'll be honest with you. I think I've probably spent more time polishing my vinyls than possibly anything else because when you get if you don't look after the vinyl. I mean, I've got some vinyl, which is probably, I was with some friends, and they said, "Well, what's the oldest you got?" And I said, "It's probably coming up to about 60 years old." And so if you've got something that's old, and if you don't put any like care into it, it's just going to disintegrate or not be usable anymore. So looking after the vinyl is essential. I mean. My son now, he's grown up. He's actually added to my collection, Rick. Can you believe it or not? So we've got this collection, but now I've also got a collection of CDs.
Yeah.
I've got 5 massive cases full of CDs now, but I've gone one step more and I've made a lot of my collection digital now.
Yeah. Right.
And that was, that was literally sitting there playing every record and making it digital. So there's no shortcuts.
I bet you did that during COVID.
No, Rick, I did this age when the MP3s first started getting around, and then all of a sudden MP3 DJs started popping up. Straight away, I thought, if I don't keep up with it, then I'll just be lost.
Because I remember when we used to on the rare occasion have an idea of who was coming in next week, because it was really by the seat of our pants and it like what was coming up on one year. You used to have like the albums there, and like Slinder Shindar used to come sign it all, and all of that was just so the value of them now must be. I mean, you see some of the prices on eBay on some of them are just crazy.
I think on the last count, someone offered me £500 for the original GT Rote. I've got the cover signed by Manak and everything. And like I said, it's a well looked after piece of kit. The vinyl is probably still in the best possible condition you could get it for saying it how old it is. So I've had £500 offered, and I've said thanks, but no thanks, because
that's mad.
The value of the actual music for me is more than. I think some people don't understand the passion I've still got for that music and the passion I've still got for Punjabi music today. They just think, oh, no, he's just a DJ, quick couple of bucks here, book there, and that's it. No, it's not about... Not everything in life is about money. Money's great, but...
That's a passion, that's a work of passion. So you approach him, mate, you get to do... What was the next stages then? So like you got a mate already in the radio scene going on at the same time?
Yeah, so we started our road show, and we got a few local shows in a few pubs, like the night before a wedding. we slotted into that kind of nicely, because night before a wedding was all the upstairs of a pub. Normally they'd just have a cassette player, but now you've actually got a couple of guys who are going to give you, a range of music.
Yeah.
And so it was good. I mean, in those days, I think we only charged 40 quid then for the night. But for us, we was getting out there, we was making money. And for whoever's wedding or function we was doing, it was like, yeah, they're getting a bit of entertainment and not just a cassette player. So it kind of like fitted in nicely. But the collection, like I said, my Punjabi collection grew. My mate Nick, he sort of knew what I was doing, what I was getting into. And then, so he came along and said, your Punjabi music collection, can I borrow it for radio? And it's like that thing about that, but do I borrow my records to someone? And I just went, Nick, yeah, listen, I would give really, really, but I don't want to let my vinyl go because it's too much, because my DJ kind of like, if I haven't got my vinyl, I can't go out and DJ. So if you take my vinyl and don't get it back to me, I'm kind of stuck. So he said to me, he goes, well, why don't you bring it down? And I thought, oh, okay, that's a bit of a compromise, isn't it? I bring it, they use it, get it back, job done. So that's what I started doing. So I started popping down to radio on a Friday evening, taking my collection down. They'd sit down and say, what's the latest this week? And then I'd say, oh, I just got this week, and this track and this track. Wow, brilliant. You got to play it on radio. So I started like adding to their playlist. And they still had a pretty mixed playlist of Bollywood and Punjabi music sort of. So, and I didn't mind doing that. And then one week, just out of the blue, they said, why don't you just join? You're coming down every Friday. And I'm like kind of like looking, and I'm thinking, I've just started my road show, and now these guys are asking me to, start working on radio.
Yeah.
And I says, look, I can't even string two words together at the moment. Yeah, I'm just about struggling on a microphone. Just say, yeah, get down.
Yeah.
And it was like, don't worry, we'll help you and train you. And I was like, no. I goes, you guys are just taking the mickey. I says, I'm quite happy you can borrow my records. I'll come down. And they started insisting, saying, no, we definitely need you. That's where I got my break into radio. And
it's been 40 years. It's been 40 years this year from
Yeah, it has, Rick. And to be honest with you, it's kind of like unbelievable, because it feels like a click of a finger and it's gone. We've tried to sort of celebrate it on radio, which we've done, but there's still loads more we could have done. And the first thing I did is when my the editor sent us an email basically saying this is what we'd like to do. I sent him an email straight back saying, look, I don't think you understand. This is history. You're recording history. Yeah. And this history may never get recorded again. So for us, it's like this opportunity to get it kind of like all down on paper, as they say. So it's there. So maybe in the future somewhere, in another 10, 15 years, that can be dug out and say, look, here's a bit of the history of Punjabi music, how the show came about. So like I said, but we've only managed to get a bit of it. We would like to get a lot more of it in. But like I said, with the BBC times limited, we've still only got the 2-hour show and things. So we're going to try and work a way around it where we can still.
You reckon you could do it, with somebody listening, in terms of like independent documentary, to do it between you and the team to kind of get the story down? I mean, like, because I'm not going to be able to do it justice even in this bit, but you'll get like the ideal, because I think, and it's been a little bit morbid on this, this year has been horrific in terms of like deaths and things like that, and and without history being documented down, or those stories are gone, and like what we're left with, it's mad, because like I just done the Bhutta Jagpal interview, and some of the information that came out there, like he rarely gives an interview, and it's the first time it's been shared, and he would have just kept that with him. But I think especially with like yourself and the team around you, if it doesn't get documented down somewhere down the line, it's going to get lost. Yeah, well, we all. I know you're with us for a bit. I don't want to. No. Well, touch wood. But no, Rick, I'll be honest with you. Those kind of thoughts have come into my mind. I'm not joking. I'm not just saying it because of some of the recent events. But life's short. Yeah.
Trust me. I'm telling you, 40 years feels like a click of a finger. It's gone. I ain't going to get them years back. I ain't going to get that time back, but it's gone. And then when you're sitting here and, I think the other day we was on radio and Sati said to me, that's 4 decades. I kind of looked and I said, 4 decades? Because normally, when you talk about decade, you're kind of there's so much in it. And you just think, I'm trying to work out where those 4 decades have kind of gone.
Think of the Friday nights. Think of the things that you've missed. Think of the occasions, the family, all those kind of things.
Oh yeah, all of those kind of yes. I mean, when radio happened and we was doing stuff for radio, everything else just sat in the back, and we had to be at radio, go out to events, get involved in this, do everything kind of that was. It was a career that I never thought I was. I never kind of went out looking for it.
Yeah,
sorry, catching on my zip. Sorry, yeah. So it was never a career I sort of set myself out to be in, but it was kind of a career that kind of forced itself on me as well. But once that career was there, it's like with me when I do most things. If I'm passionate about it, I will give it 100%.
I just want to ask you something while we're on it, and it feels like in terms of chaotic where I'm kind of jumping around, but it just feels natural in that way. What would you say is when you look back on the 40 years that what you've done is that you've deemed the highlights to be? Let's say things that come to when it may not be the highlight, but things that come to mind whenever you kind of speak about it.
When I think about the 40 year, the one thing that I've always said, and I will carry on saying, is that when I was a teenager, there was nothing available for us. There was no club nights. There was no Asian DJs. There was no. It was even difficult to hear Punjabi music anywhere unless you had it at home in your house. So there was no radio, no nothing, no format whatsoever. If you went to a wedding, you was lucky because they have some sort of entertainment there.
Yeah.
But even then, when I started going to wedding, a lot of them just used to have cassette players. So I was part of that era, generation where you started first seeing bands perform, or a couple of singers come and do a little bit with a Vajja and stuff like that. So that started developing. So I've seen it from there. And that was my first kind of real sort of insight into music in the UK. But what I've always said to people is I wanted to change it for the next generation.
Yeah.
I wanted them to connect to their roots. I wanted them to be able to easily be able to turn on the radio and find a station that plays their music. Whereas for us, it was a total opposite. We would have to search high and low to find a radio station that even played one Punjabi, one track, never mind a whole show. So for me, that's what I wanted, because a lot of my friends who grew up with me, there was a few of us who were, like I said, I think I was very dissy. Nick was quite into it, but a lot of the others, they were just there was, are we Western? Are we Eastern? What are we?
Yeah, I guess even that would have been a bit difficult because you're on a show in terms of the identity. You're trying to do a crossover show. You've got two extremes even in the team, and then you're trying to get that balance of product to put out there. And the Desi market will always going to be louder anyway because it's in the nature.
It was, and that's what we soon after I joined the radio, we soon realised that. Listen, as the new releases started coming in, and you got to think, you got 8 tracks on an album. 8 was a minimum then, and you can quite easily play Jagwala Milla, every one of those songs. Quite easily. For there were songs there for different occasions. Sada Putra Vasde, and then obviously you had the dance numbers. So you had a good variety of music to play. So every week our playlist was getting more and more Punjabi, where we just decided one week, that's it. From next week we're doing a full 2-hour Punjabi show. That's it. Nothing else but Punjabi music, and that's when it really kind of really exploded. The radio, the phone calls, the fan mail. We used to have sacks of grey, them grey sacks from the post office. They used to be dropped off for us.
And did was there a time where you like a big star that you thought, oh, we've made it, like this is weird, like we're interviewing somebody?
One of our first people to come on our station was Amarjit Sidhu. Yeah. And we'd all got to sort of know of Amarjit Sidhu because obviously he did the 1985 Live Aid thing in Birmingham. He was with Chirag Bachchan. He did the Pop Awards, the very first Pop Awards.
Dome,
and he'd done, the Dome. So the first time he came to radio, and we was having this conversation with Amarjit a few weeks ago because we had him on air talking about our 40 years. And I said, Amarjit, you cannot believe that my hand was shaking, as I was trying to drink my tea and stay calm as you passed your LP to me. And I was looking at the LP and then I says, could you sign this for me? And he was kind of like saying, but that's how I felt. And I was saying, no, Amarjit, you do not understand. You was a big star then to us. So for him to come onto our radio station and do that interview, it was like, I think we spoke about that. I mean, the whole station spoke about it. Never mind, no, not just us, because even the station was saying that, like, who was that guy? Because Amarjit, dressed up smartly, nice car, pulled up in the car park, walked out with his albums and everything. And we was thinking, this guy's like on it because he knows exactly what he's going to say, what he's doing, everything. So he was one of our first, probably 86 time when he came onto our show, and we was just like, God, for weeks. I think we were just floating around saying, yeah, we just interviewed Amarjit Sidhu a few weeks ago. So yeah, and that's how it was. Then after Amarjit Sidhu, I think we'd gone out to the Pop Awards where all the bands were.
Yeah.
Performed at the very first Pop Awards, and in them days we used to have like a cassette, well, not a cassette recorder, but we used to call it a Ewer, had tape to tape on it. So we got one of those, took loads of tape with us, and backstage, we checked with Amarjit if we could get backstage, and so we interviewed everyone like in the dressing room area, because doing it out there was where the gig was happening.
And now, because of like what people have done, there's footage in a lot of where you're actually presenting as well. So so like everything that's been said is all verified. You can just see it now where it's been done.
Yeah. So we was in the changing rooms, and all these bands were kind of like walking, and you're kind of like saying, "Do you mind if we have a quick word with you?" And they're like, "Who are you?" And I say, "We're BBC Radio Derby." I can remember talking to Shin just after the release of Our Natural. Azad, Holly, Deepak Khazanchi. That's where we first sort of met him then at that time. So all the bands that were at the Pop Awards we interviewed on that day. So Upnasangi, Chirag Bachchan were there, but they didn't take no part in the Pop Awards because Amarjit was part of Chirag Bachchan, and they felt that
conflict
if they won an award or something, then people would start, but they were still there, supporting everything that was happening, which was good to see. So so going out there and doing those interviews, wow, it was magic. And then, like I said, bringing it back to radio, edit, as like you've told me, you have to edit. We used to edit on tape, splice tape, stick it back together, and make it sound like a good interview. Add a bit of music into it, so it's like a package.
Yeah.
So every week for a few weeks, we had a package, and just sort of introduced it as, this is Manjeet Gondal and Holly. This is his, and this is what he had to say. And the big topic that came from that particular Pop Awards was Deepak Khazanchi putting together Bhangra Fever. Because Deepak never told us he was doing that project, but Holly were on it, Hira were on it, Kalaprit were on it. So they was all saying, "Oh, I'm doing a remix. Before we knew it, bang, Bhangra Fever came out. And wow, that was just like, what the hell has happened here? And you see Deepak's influence, because he had worked with mainstream bands before he started producing Punjabi music. But Deepak is, if people don't know about him, I'm going back to the time of when there was an Asian program on BBC Sunday mornings called Naye Jindagi Naye Jeevan. Your parents will probably know about
Yeah,
that.
I'm young, man.
So
Come on.
it was a program where every week they would have one live performer, as in Bollywood. Occasionally you'd get one Punjabi artist, but Deepak always used to play the guitar in that sort of quartet or band or whatever it was. So that's where, and then he was doing lots of work in mainstream. He's done a lot of like music, backing music and stuff like that for Bollywood as well. But he's told us stories of that's where he first met George Michael.
Wow.
And both George and I forget the other
in
Andy,
Wham. Yeah.
In Wham. They were desperately knocking on studio doors then, trying to get someone to do the music. And then I think eventually Deepak said we was in one studio and they was in the studio next door doing their first single just before it got released. And I was like, so George Michael was next door to you? So yeah, next door doing his stuff. And you kind of like, wow. And then obviously we all know what happened with Wham after that first release of theirs. They was massive, and George Michael himself, sadly no longer with us, but great artist. But Deepak's got some great stories. I think he also featured on Top of the Pops with a band called Blancmange. So Deepak's done a lot of music that people don't know about.
Very underrated. Like I think obviously, I think there's a certain generation that know of him, but another generation, or a lot of generation, just flies under the radar.
They don't know about. But even now, if you listen to some of the Punjabi albums he's done and the music he's put into them, Rick, they're still kind of like mind blowing because the pieces. He delayed the release of an album, Hira's album, Cool and Deadly, for 2 years. Because he waited for the right flute player to play that piece. If you listen to that song called Samsung, in the beginning there's a flute player, and he couldn't find the right person to play those pieces. Then Gurdas Mann came over, and Gurdas Mann in the early days used to have a flute player in his band. So Deepak spoke to them and says, do you think you could come in into the studio and record a few pieces for me? And that guy came in while he was on tour, recorded a few pieces for him, and then Deepak said, now I've finished, this is the album. And then he released it. And it's a 2-year delay because people thought after Diamonds, he'd hit the peak and that was it. Nothing was ever going to top Diamonds. But when he did Cool and Deadly, wow, people, he just knocked people's socks off, blew their mind away, whatever you want to call it.
Just in terms of obviously the value of kind of from the producer side, the marketing side, when did you start seeing a shift where potentially where you were asking people to come in to when people were saying, buddy, you got to get us on, can you get us on please, in terms of from a marketing strategy?
To be honest with you, as soon as the word got around that BBC Radio Derby are supporting Punjabi music, we was just inundated with requests. There was Friday nights, bands would just turn up without even telling us that they're coming. So you'd be there and there'd be a knock on the door and you were like, open the door and says, hope you don't mind, but you interview Karnaya. And you're like, who are you? And then they'd tell you and then they'd give you that, okay. And you got to imagine, we only had a 2-hour program.
Yeah.
So sometimes we used to have 3 or 4 bands on in one show. So it was kind of like we just got it. How could I describe it? It'd be like, I suppose in today's world, it'd be like, say, putting a product out there on YouTube or something, and then all of a sudden it just blows up.
Yeah. Because you would like, I remember the first time, because I've heard you like since I was a kid, and then I was walking down Soul Road and I saw you come out of, was it Music Waves?
Yeah.
And I was walking past and I heard you, then I heard you speak. I turned around, I go, that's Poli. Because it was like,
okay.
So I knew your voice obviously before I knew your face.
Yeah.
But people might have had the same thing with you because they've heard you from that bit. And then that certain kind of characters or radio presenters, they become sometimes even bigger than artists themselves because they become that you could I could mention your name to like my generation, like Poli Tank, and then you say Cash and Poli Radio XLs, they'll know who you are straight away because they know from that side. how are you dealing with that side of things? Because one, you got pressure of people that saying, I want to come and do it. Then you got your own kind of, hang on a second, my life's changing here slightly. What happens?
Rick, I think because you've worked with me, and you've probably seen a side of me that probably no other, I've always tried to keep sort of down to earth about it, and and I've always said to people, the full-time job I do as a social worker keeps me well grounded. Yeah, because that's where I see the reality of life most days of my job. So doing this radio thing, it's brilliant, and don't get me wrong, there's not a moment I haven't enjoyed. Yeah, and I'm hoping I can go on to enjoy many more years. Yeah, but it's that's really kept me grounded, and I've always said to people, look, I'm just a boy from the Bronx, kind of like, and I've grown up, and I still am that in the Bronx. I'm still approachable. People can come and talk to me, and like you said, yes, people recognize me by my voice more than my face. Yeah, and so be it. But obviously, it was just on Saturday. We did a daytime gig in Birmingham. The DJ sort of finished the night off, and we're walking down. He's got his equipment, and I said, "Yeah, let me give you a hand." So he's carrying. We're walking down the stairs, and we're chatting away. And he said, "You know what? Because he had heard me, on stage. He says, man, he goes, she was cool on stage. The way you come across. I says, well, I'm don't want to say anything, but I said, I've got about 40 years experience of it now. So if I can't master my art now, I'll never be able to master it, will I really? And he was like, but who are you then? And I kind of like laughed, and I says, it don't matter, does it? I'm just. He says, no, seriously, Tom. And I says, oh, I'm Poli Tank. And he just dropped his equipment. He went, you're Poli Tank? And I went, yeah. And he went, oh my God. He kind of like, it was almost like that. He froze for a few minutes to realize that, oh my God, this is Poli Tank. This is, I don't know. I've listened to this guy. I've heard this guy of whatever, And he just went straight. He goes, can I have a photo with you? And I was like, of course you can. I goes, what's, he goes, I didn't realize you was Poli. I said, yeah, no. I goes, I was on, I know in Little Wrighton, it was there, Poli, hosted by Poli Tank. I thought you may have, no, he goes, no, I said, yep. So I still get that. I mean, I'm still, when I go out and about, I still get stories of, like you said, you listen to me, and people are still coming up and they're saying to me, oh, we listen to you on XL, we listen to you at BBC Radio Derby. I mean, the biggest fan, I suppose, is Dips Bhangra. I mean, only a few weeks ago, we interviewed him again about his childhood memories, etc., and everything. And he's still, every time I hear that story, you can still hear it. It's almost like he goes into regression of him being that kid coming home on a Friday, fish and chips or whatever, and put the radio on. He said all the family used to sit and listen, and you're just like, wow, really?
Yeah, but that's much of an impact. That's what it like. I used to like from the kid. I haven't thought about it in 30 years or something, right? But I even remember the radio, what it looked like. I've never thought of that before. I remember the radio in the kitchen because we'd finish our food, and it used to be the only place the radio used to be in the kitchen. So we used to have that and then listen to it, and then mom's in the kitchen, and she'd be, and the Bhangra, we'd run out and listen to the latest song or whatever it was. So it's, I think, I know the kind of person that you are. You're exactly very humble, and you've helped a lot of people that people don't even know about. I can tell you that now. And one day there'll be a time where I can share and go into it. I know, because when we've had the conversation, you don't necessarily want to drill down into too much of the stuff, but
no.
The amount of stuff and the work that you've done and how you've helped people has been crazy. But it's the soundtrack of your life, and when you kind of reflect back and you think, oh, I remember this time, I remember what we would, what albums were coming out then and where we were, and I think so. I want to kind of like move it, progressing it on, because then when you you got this voice now, everybody knows you at that point. You started getting approached by other radio stations to see, to do that, and one of them was the biggest in kind of so the biggest commercial kind of radio in that way, independent radio, which was Radio XL at the time, which came out. So how were you approached, and what was your first thoughts of it?
We had a well, a friend of Amarjit's, Brian Thornycroft, was Amarjit's right-hand man for many, many years, and I'm sure they're still pretty good friends now. He got involved in the first sort of, as they started gathering to get that radio station together. First of all, what happened prior to that, there was petitions by the sort of community there in Birmingham to try and get a commercial station up and running. Mr. Ayub from Oriental Star agencies was very, very instrumental in that. He got a lot of his community on. There was some Sikh community, Hindu community, all got together. So everyone was petitioning to get this commercial station put together. So eventually, as this, I think a license agreement was given, things started moving on. And Brian Thornycroft, he got the job of head of sales. And through Amarjit, we knew Brian very well as well. And I think he'd even been down a few times to Derby with Amarjit, and we'd met. And so he knew us quite well. And so he approached Cash and myself. He said, how would you feel about doing a show for Radio XL? And, I mean, straight away, it's kind of like, well, it's Birmingham and we're in Derby. And so you're kind of like thinking, Birmingham. But then we always knew that Birmingham was I still say it to people, the world capital of Bhangra music is Birmingham. Yeah. And we knew a lot of our listeners already from the Aaj Kal BBC show were West Midlands kind of like based. And so for us, it was like we're going home almost to our fan base. And not disregarding the East Midlands, because we had a lot of fans in the East Midlands as well. But West Midlands was just like, wow. We was thinking audiences. We was thinking like, even just musically, all the record companies were based there. A lot of the artists were sort of West Midlands. So meeting, hooking up with them, catching up with them, going to the record companies, how easy would it be? There was quite a lot of negotiation went on between us and the then management of Radio XL. We finally came to some agreement in early 1995, just before the radio launched its signal. So it launched a signal, and I think they did a four-week like signal test. So in that 4-week period, we came across and agreed that we would join, and we would do a Saturday morning breakfast program from 8 till 11. And yeah, that was just like, the breakfast program was the beginning of what was to be. But obviously they knew we was going to come with all the knowledge, all the experience, the music, bang, it was there. And even now, if you look at Radio XL's playlist, they haven't got not even a fraction of what I've got.
Yeah, because I remember when you were reminiscing when I was there, that you would come in, your coffees were ready. It was like superstar treatment. You used to go in, do the show. All the artists would just come and see and speak to you guys. Turn around, you go out with them, and that was it.
Well, once obviously all the industry sort of realised we was in Birmingham, then the phone calls started coming in like, after the show, will you come and meet us? The record companies, we've got a new release coming out. Can you pop over and have a listen to it and take a copy of it for the show next week? So it kind of like moving to Birmingham, everything just kind of like fell into place for us because everything became a lot easier. We weren't waiting anymore. We could pop over to Roma Music. We could pop over to Oriental Star.
MV towards when I was down there, you took me to MV a few times.
Yeah. So MV, all the other smaller record companies as well, because it wasn't like we just chose our favourites and said, we're only dealing with the big boys. We dealt with them all. Like you say, Music Wave. There was another couple of labels, smaller labels in Birmingham. We dealt with them. High Tech was another major player. So they sort of all, if we didn't go to see them, they would come to Radio XL and they would wait, and they would, you might be rushing off or something or whatever, but they say, oh, quickly, here, this is for you. This is, have a listen to it, see what you think, or come and see us next week or whatever. Same with the artists. Once they realised, the phone calls started coming, oh, yeah, you know, we got a new album coming out. Can we come on air? But the difference with Radio XL, it was a commercial station. So everything was about money. You know, we didn't have the luxury of having a fund like you do with the BBC. So a new sort of element started for us as well, is because we had to get in, you know, the industry sort of used to this commercial element of,
so they had to pay for the advertising now.
Yes, pay for advertising, pay to come on the show. And so it was like talking to we went straight to the record companies and told them that this is what's happened. This is where we are, but we're on a commercial station now. But with it being commercial, you can sponsor the show. You can sponsor an hour. You can sponsor the whole show. You can sponsor. So in our first shows, Rick, all 3 hours were sponsored by different records. And every week there was queuing up. There's almost like fighting amongst themselves. So now it's our turn this week.
The free CDs used to come out, man.
and that was it. You know, anytime, you know, you phoned any of the companies up and said, can we have some stuff for competition? You know, you'd think like, oh, they're going to drop us 4 or 5 CDs off. They'd drop 25 off. You know, a full box that they'd give to a shop. They'd say, here, I'll let you. And you'd be like, what, 25 CDs? Yeah. And so you'd be like, competition prizes were just like piled up. And there weren't enough, we weren't on air enough to sort of, you know, get all the deep seed, but bit by bit, obviously, you know.
And you were getting like, even people, I'm in danger of kind of ending these stories for you, because I just want to get them out as much, but you know, you'd get in big senior artists. I remember Gurdas Maan couldn't want like, here's the tickets, make sure you get the tickets very briefly. And then when we do Mega Mellar and all of these kind of things going, and like artists knowing you on first name basis. And it was like, this guy is the original, like this guy's a connector in terms of, I could see the popularity even at that point, you know, from being that commercial station.
Yeah, I think, for me, Rick, I've always kind of like considered them as extended family. You know, the industry, all the artists. I mean, even now, when I see them or meet them, it's still like we're friends. You know, I mean, with all the art, I've never, even though I've had favourites music, you know, where I think, oh no, you know, I've got to listen. I've never ever kind of like let that come across to say, you know, I've only got one favourite artist and that's all I'm going to play. I mean, even meeting Gurdas Maan, people like that, Manik, Surinder Shindar, Hans Raj Hunts, you name them. You know, it's always been that, you know, what you guys have done is brilliant, because in their own way, they've written their own chapters. And you can't take that away from them. You can't take that stuff away from Manik, what he's done. No one can. No one can touch it. No one can repeat it. Gurdas Maan's the same. You know, started in 1981. Look where he is now. Yeah, you can't take away from what he's done. I mean, people might not like. People might not appreciate him.
I remember ringing you from India. Actually, did you do the last interview with Kaka?
Yeah. So, and that's, you know, to think I've got that photo with him in the studio, and that kind of like I still see it and I still think, oh my God, you know. And then maybe just after you left, Jagjit Chitra came on my show. A few months later, he passed away. Yeah. Yamala Jat, I did a stage. We did a 1989. We did a dome concert with him, where he came on and we did a Bhangra Accolades. And I stood on stage with this man while he was singing, and I was holding his microphone for him while he played the Tumbi for us. Now, on the day, you know, people say, well, what? I said, on the day, all I was worried about, he was an old man, very delicate. He'd come from India, and I think it was quite cold. And he still insisted on wearing just his kurta, dhoti, you know, like that's how he was. And I was just thinking, it's cold, he's old, and I don't want anything to happen to him. So I was really kind of like looking after him and not even thinking that this guy, because of him, this is why we've got all of this that's happened, you know. And when people hear that story of he created the Tumbi from the tumba. So, you know, that one-stringed instrument that people still are so passionate about now, he created it. And to have stood next to him on stage and supported him to perform is, I haven't got the words to describe that, Rick, honestly.
My baba bought a tumbi off him.
Yeah,
and I had it, and as kids, we just broke it apart. But
well,
you know, but it's just like the significant. What I'm getting at is like, you know, how when you think of the introduction I gave you, it's quite apt in terms of like, you know, from what you were doing. Was there I want to ask this slightly negative question and then come back onto a bit more positive side of it, which was. You and Polly obviously parted ways during that bit, and you know, I think in that sorry, it's not a negative. I'll come back. I'll edit this bit in. Did you feel like you came into your own being and you kind of blossomed? Your personality came across, and I think you were one that I think the listeners kind of engaged into you. I want to the question I'm trying to get to you is that from the point of where you were in the early 80s and when you've got into the media side, did you sense the growing nature of politics in the industry becoming more and more contagious?
Yeah, Rick, I'll be honest with you. The politics side from virtually when we sort of got into radio, going out interviewing and stuff like that. You know, I've seen plenty of politics, dirty tricks, all of that. You know, I've never ever been a fan of anything like that because I always believe in kind of like for our community, they are, you know, we're still living in a land which is it really ours? I mean, are we here forever now, or is there a time that might come that we could still get ejected from this country? Yeah. So to be here and to having sort of grown up, I suppose in my own community and culture where we was always taught to be this is it. This is our circle of friends. So we need to keep this kind of circle. And then to come out and start seeing that in an industry that was just starting to get established and it was building up its reputation. It was building up to becoming what it was. You saw those between the bands sometimes. Some of it was nasty, but some of it was genuine rivalry as well, Rick, is that if say, I don't want to name names, because people, so if band A released an album and all the other bands heard it, they would say, my God, what an album. We need to do something that's better than that. So it was like a friendly, but
that's healthy competition. Yeah, that's healthy competition.
So every band, you know, no matter who it was, as soon as a new release came out, we all went to the shops to buy it because we all wanted to know what the new sound was or what the new song was or what, and that was it. So it was a very, very healthy competition that developed, and it kind of like almost, you know, pushed each band to go back into the studio and do something different and do something better. But every band had their own sound. It's very unique to one band. Yeah, there was no band that sort of, you said, oh, they did that, so you've done exactly the same. No, it wasn't that. Every band had their own sound. When you heard them live, you could tell it was which band it was. When you heard them produce albums, you knew straight away without even looking at you could just hear it and say, this is that band, or this producer has worked with this band to produce this. So you could even choose or tell the producers, i.e. the biggest example is Deepak and also Kuljit Bumrah, who's not mentioned very often. But if you have a think about him, I mean, he did Jagwala Milla. Yeah, he did a lot of Premi albums. He did Gurdasman, Peer Tere Jandi, and the album after that as well. So this guy, you know, also is a massive, massive producer. He's been doing music since he was a kid. His own mother was a singer. She did the original Gidda Pao Harndio song, Mahinda Kaur Bumrah. And they had their own little band called the Bumrah it was the family. His brothers also played instruments, so they had their own family set up as well. And he produced many, many albums. Then, of course, he went on to Sangeeta as well.
Yeah.
Produced her albums, and then he's done lots of work. And even now, he's created an electronic double R.
Wow.
Yeah, and for the first time ever, double R music is going to be notified. So you'll be able to give it to someone and say, "This is what we want you to play for this song." Whereas before, double R players have just gone up and say, "You play it, and I'll match something up." Now you'll be actually get notified music to say, "This is what we want you to play to this." Yeah. So he's done all of this. So in his own, and of course he's an MBE now, and well deserved. Like I said, he's influenced a lot of musicians and artists in his time as well. But to do an album with Gurdas Man, Bir Tere Jandi, to think that was produced here in London, the sound of it, yeah, the songs, the sound, everything, and to think that was a guy in London that knocked that album out. So the UK.
Do you believe that? So, do you believe that the politics of people not getting the true kind of credit is what you're getting at, or is it more?
Some of it may be about credit. Some of it's just out of because, for instance, if I gave you an example, in the early days, there was quite a few bands. Even Chirag Bachchan was 2 bands. Yeah. It was only later that they joined to become Chirag Bachchan, but initially they was 2 bands. I think Shin started out life with a band called Leo, and I think Danny was part of that band as well. Or I can't remember whether it was Charlie and Shin, but it was like 2 of them were in one band before Danny, or they got the 3 of them got together and formed DCS. So there was a lot of kind of, I suppose, bands falling out, bands remaking, bands reshaping.
But how was it difficult for you? Because you've still got a relationship with all of them, and you're interviewing that where you put in like a difficult kind of spot. I mean, like, believe it or not, even I get a little bit of headache from people, even when I'm doing this, and I don't really give a shit. You know what I mean? And whereas yours is like, you're probably one of the first people to try and professionalize a desi market or an industry in there, and then you've got people already going to try and potentially spoil it.
We never got involved in the politics of it, Rick. So if there was 2 or 3 bands who didn't, we didn't want to get into their politics. We always say, look, that's not our problem. We're here. It's like, you're doing your job. Yeah, you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
If something else is happening somewhere else with another artist, what can you do about it? How can you change it? We tried. We tried. We even 1987, 86, 87, we set up a AMA committee, Asian Music Arts, and we had a Midlands branch and we had a London branch, and we got them together as a music industry to try and sort of solve some of these issues that were popping up.
Yeah.
And to work together as an entire industry. The only good thing that came out of that AMA was they did a Gurpur album, Gurpur 90.
Yeah, Gurpur 90. Yeah.
A double cassette.
I went there. I went to that.
Yeah. So that was the best thing that came out of AMA. It worked for a while. Then it kind of like just faded away again. But the setup was there. We put an infrastructure in there for everyone to try and help each other. But the battles for bands out there were on a regular basis. Getting record deals, going to gigs, not getting paid, the kind of things. And then royalties was always a massive, massive issue. We even set up interviews with PRS, MCPS. We interviewed them on radio on behalf of the industry to try and find out what people need to be doing. We literally were not only letting them come on show and promote themselves, but we was trying to guide them into, this is what you need to be doing. Sign up with this, PRS, get yourself registered, do this, do that, so you can get royalties. So we was kind of like educating them as well to sort of, in an attempt to move the whole industry forward, and rather than just rely on records. Because to this day, there's a lot of artists and bands who sold everything to the record companies. Yeah, their rights, everything. So those record companies would give them a lump sum, and they would be happy bringing the lump sum home and dividing it amongst the band and saying, there's our payment, but not realizing that 25, 30 years down the line, that record company is still collecting royalties for something they produced back in the 80s. Yeah. And some companies who have been very, very clever about it, just before their license agreement runs out, they remix it and relaunch it again. So they've got it for another 25 years. Yeah. The only band that really caught on to this was Alarm. And they set up their own, I think it was called JCR. Chunni was one of them, Randir was the other, and I can't remember.
Maybe.
No, I don't think it was Johnny. It was the original members of Alarm. I can't remember the other. I think he was the guitarist. So they set up their own publishing. So what they did is they would let a record company release their album, but the royalties and rights belonged to them. Hence, when Johnny did the album about 4 or 5 years ago, and he did a reworking of all of his songs. So that's given him another 25 years of royalties. So wherever that's played in the world, and as long as it's registered, he'll collect royalties from it. And that's what we always said. In the long run, a lot of artists.
It was so hard to see in terms of how people access music now as well.
Yeah. And if you think about it, there's people like Maljeet Singh who have probably lost out on so many royalties. A.S. Kang. You know, I someone like him has probably got money waiting out there that you don't even know about.
And then you look at some of the Punjabi artists, if they had it done, brought up like everyone's playing Chamkila. Imagine the
royalties. Yeah, you think? I mean, his family, by rights. I mean, Manik, Chamkila, all of those artists, their family should be living off their royalties. Yeah, with no problems, no concerns. You know, Gurdas Mann, another one. So if you look on the majority of his albums, he sold his rights. You know, and I'm not saying that obviously Gurdas Mann. Look, he does a lot of live shows, so he's
yeah. It's just in terms of if you're comparing it to how people are releasing now and the mainstream there. It was just a different time. I think that's the only way you could kind of make peace with yourself.
So you think some of Gurdas Mann's biggest hits are not actually owned by himself anymore. They're owned by whoever he's released the albums with. And so at any time they can pick it up, they can remix it, they can do what they want with it, and they can still continue to make money from it. And so that is where our industry it needed that education. So we try to educate them as well. But as for the actual politics, we was never interested in it. It was for us. It was like a baby, and you're bringing it up to be the best it possibly could be, and that's what we wanted for the industry. Not that we was, people think, in an individual better pussy ball, but and I tell you something, even to this day, I've probably put more in than I've actually got out of it myself. Yeah, and the only people that are witness to that will probably be my family.
Well, I used to know. I used to see it when I used to see you going on Saw Road, and then you're buying it yourself. Like where it was going, and I used to kind of do the maths at the same time, and you just think, the guys doing it, where's the kick? Like you should be giving it in for bloody free.
See, there's albums. I've got the cassette, I've got the LP, I've got the CD, and yes, now I've created the digital myself. But with a lot of them, I've told them that I've made it digital. So even then, I've tried not to, sort of say I've done it digital. I'm making money. I'm not making any money out of it, but purely for myself, because now even radio, BBC now, we've got the latest technology. It's all digital. Had I not made my music digital, I'd be struggling now to even go on air.
Yeah.
To be able to do a show. So digital is the new way, and to keep up with it, I've had to do it. Even the stage, there was the
mini disc.
Mini discs as well, and I've still got a mini disc player, and some of my music's still on mini disc. But that was another thing, and even prior to all of that, when I say to people, there was a system called 8-track that used to fit in your car. And people are, what the hell is that? But 8-track was even before cassettes and vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to, I want to bring it a little bit together, and then where we kind of met in that bit. So, like, you always had a great relationship, you know, on air that we had with Clash and stuff, and then it fell apart.
It kind of like Rick. What it was is, you know, sometimes because obviously we had worked together since 1986. Cash was on BBC Radio Derby, and so we'd been part of that team. And even for us, I mean, the journey it's not always been like, oh yeah, this is a, you know, we've had our problems. We've had issues, you know, amongst ourselves, between ourselves. And the thing is, you know, when you've got a team like that, we've all sort of had our own directions. I've always had my direction was that I was DJing. So I had my own road show. So I was getting out there a lot more than what Sati, Nick or Cash was. So, I mean, even now, I think only a couple of weeks ago, I met someone who says, you did my son's first birthday party.
Thanks for making me feel old, yeah.
Yeah, and I like, how old's your son now? And they says, oh, he's married and he's got a child. And I was like, okay, wow. Right.
Is that where you go, do you need another booking?
Yeah, that's where I give him another card and say, I'm still available.
That's it.
But yeah, so, you know, you think like things like that. So I was getting out there a lot more. So, you know, from the early days, we started picking up work in the Midlands. Then we started picking up work with all the promoters from the early shows. So, you know, when people say to me, oh, you know, you used to DJ and stuff like that, I said, look, I've probably done all the top clubs in central England, certainly London as well. I've been far as Glasgow Barrowlands, been to San Francisco. I spent a whole summer in Spain with Malgit Singh.
I actually remember that.
Yeah, we was out there every other weekend, and you know how much that interfered with my sort of work. It was unbelievable, but it had to be done. And then it was like fly out, spend a night there, do a gig, fly back in, and back to work.
I remember there was a festival that you were doing the sound check, with the sound desk. And you showing me the photos of it, and you said, "Look at the size of this desk."
yeah. And that was it. And you was working with this equipment, and some of it was like, you know, only probably used in mainstream places. And I suppose the biggest place I've been, and Malkit took me once again, was to Hollywood Bowl, and he performed there. I think it was a Diwali we went, and we was like, you know, VIP superstar kind of status. We was in this hotel, everything, and it just feels unreal. It was like chauffeur drowned everywhere. You wanted anything, people running around for you, clicking, you know. And so we went and performed at the Hollywood Bowl, and I was sat there, and I did the sound for him there, and there the booth. It just kind of like all day long. It was kind of like a flat booth. And we was doing the sound to an empty stadium. It was quite different. And, you know, the guys were saying to me, you know, as it fills up, and it did fill up, the sound would dampen. So we're probably going to have to adjust it later. So when I got back to the sound booth, all of a sudden the sound booth started going upwards. And I was like saying to, what the hell are you doing, guys? And it's like saying, oh, we have to get above the kind of like sound of what's coming out, because otherwise the crowd will just, you won't hear it.
Won't hear it.
So I'm raised up in, I don't know how high up, and I'm not even thinking about looking. I'm afraid of heights, by the way. Yeah. So I'm not even thinking about looking high, you know. And these guys would say, yeah, okay, can you hear the sound now? I said, yeah. Okay, let's start tweaking a bit. And so we had to get the tweak round, and because it was an outdoor, there was the sound was kind of like it was traveling everywhere. So there was no control over it. But the guy said, they told me that's how it happens there, because of the way the design is of it. But the music, he said, as it comes up, he goes, the music, the people will get, the acoustics, they will get the full feel of it, whereas we won't. And I was saying, look, I don't care about me as long as the people and the performers, they hear it, and it's got to be right for them. That's all I needed. But yeah, so it's crazy, because I still think, and people will still say to me, I'm just a local boy from Normanton, Derby.
Because when I met you, like Cash had just left at that bit, and I think it's safe to say, from the perception when I met you, because I came in a couple of times to just give you a hand, I was interested, that. And then you're like, and we just got on like, really, really well, had a really good kind of relationship, and I always look back at that in fond memories. But I always think that was starting to be the change then, where we started getting a lot of pirate, all the torrents started to kick in, where the CDs, the fake CDs used to start coming. And that used to start hemorrhaging and hitting the labels at such a level that
massive,
that reinvestment and the quality of music started to go downhill really, really quickly.
The problem is when the CD technology came in, what a lot of the artists didn't realize is that they was actually giving them a master. So the quality is that good that normally they would only produce that from, if you were remastering, they would produce that as one master and then remaster from that. So when you was doing a CD, Rick, you was handing your master out to everyone. So if you released in the UK and say by the next 2 days, I could get that CD to America, Canada, India, right, and someone could pick it up there, copy it, bang, stick a new label on it. Here's the latest album from, and the thing is, there is no control, and the thing is there's no legislation that covers over the three sort of Americas, Europe, and Asia. They've all got different policies on music. So if you went to America to try and challenge it and it's not registered there, you didn't have a leg to stand on. Same as with India, Middle East, wherever. If you haven't actually got a contract in that country with a record label, you got no leg to stand on. So yeah, it was literally, when we used to speak to him, it's almost like giving you music away for free.
Yeah.
And that's what happened because it impacted.
I remember it coming up as a discussion because Taz Stereo Nation, he came in for an interview, and I remember because he needed a Dumbi sample because he was doing that for Apna Sigit, his song. Side story, I don't know if you remember this, but you should, where you concocted a story that was published in the paper that there was the lyrics in there. There's a very dodgy line in there, and it got banned. But this radio station didn't exist, and the story of the PR came from that bit.
It's all sort of sometimes people say bad news is bad news, but sometimes bad news for an artist is good news, because if there's a bit of bad news about an artist, everyone wants to know what it is. What was it? What's he done? What's he got caught with? What? So the story was, that the radio station had banned because of that one word in the song. So they'd banned the song. So that it kind of like picked up one. I can't remember which paper picked up on it first. They picked up on it, and then kind of like the headline was Taz music is banned. So you can imagine that, how it kind of like, what do you mean Taz's music is banned? He's why? What is it? What song is it? So everyone just wanted to hear what that word was. So what happened was they went out and bought the music to hear that one word. And out of that, that song became a hit.
Yeah, because I had a spare copy of a Marnik album which had the original Tumbi sample, which was Koi More Leavuni in there. So I always remember that story because it was the first time I visibly saw the game in terms of like a PR point of view that I didn't, as a punter before, I didn't know that side even existed anymore. Like it didn't even existed, and I saw how it was constructed and put together. I thought,
you had to have kind of like, I mean, we obviously been in Birmingham, doing PR work with artists and companies kind of almost fell hand in hand. Because we was there every Saturday, So our Saturdays, I mean, sometimes, I know we used to finish the show. I mean,
because I've got a couple of stories that I need verifying that you're the only person who knows this, by the way. So
Yeah. So just let me quickly. So obviously we'd finished the show, and then after that, I'd still be in Birmingham. Come 7, 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Still driving. And then I've got to go now. I've got to go home. So when I used to say to people, "Oh, when I go to Birmingham, it's a full day. I've got nothing else to do except be in Birmingham, meet people or speak to them." The other PR kind of stuff we did was with Malkit when we did Millennium Mixes. And we took him on a tour of record shops up and down, London, Midlands, and then in Manchester. And I remember when we went to Manchester, I forget the name of the video shop there. They sold out, so they had to run around Manchester, get cassettes from their other record stores. So because there was a massive queue, and they'd put up a sign saying "Malkit sing here at this time," and to get signed photo. And so all the stock they'd got of Millennium Mix sold out. So they managed to drive around Manchester, pick up from other record shops and everything, just to get enough cassettes into the store so they could get him signing and there. And we spent about 2 hours there. And for 2 hours, he didn't get a break. He just signed, smiled, photos, chatted to people. The shop was Barn Rhythm was the name of the shop. I just remembered, absolutely full of punters just coming out to see him. But because we'd gone out on tour and done this little thing, it meant his album sold more. Just on that one weekend, which was the initial weekend, we actually managed to sell out more of his album than anywhere. So for him, brilliant. Record company were pleased with it. And plus, Cash and myself, we'd executive produced that album. So
wow.
It was good in that sense. But just to be out there and doing these kind of things and giving people sort of titles for their albums, giving them PR stunts, giving them, stuff to think about, don't just be, we always used to say to them, don't just be that one singer on stage and you just hold the mic and just sing into the mic and don't interact. You've got to interact with the crowd. You've got to make it feel like it's a live show here. Be with me. So even bands like Pradesi, we did a lot with them. We got Pradesi to smash a keyboard at Wolverhampton.
Okay.
Yeah. Rock and roll, mate. They had an old keyboard and we said, just do it on stage in the middle of the song. And they did it. And, the whole crowd, foxes, they just stopped and watched while Pradesi, all the music, the band smashed up a keyboard. They literally, if you'd seen it, if that was a man who was on the floor there, it looked like serious GBH. But they really kicked the crap out of this keyboard. And when they smashed it to little pieces. And little pieces were flying everywhere. And all of a sudden we was thinking, nah, maybe it weren't a good idea. But it was New Year's Eve. So, but it worked for Pradesi because they had a little bit of that rock edge to their music. And so it kind of paid off from it, worked. But
they hit the right chord.
They definitely did make that night.
So did you start to think that this was the kind of decline of commercial radio at that point in terms of because you started to see releases start slowing down, the band scene started going, the DJ started to take over a bit more, Punjab music scene started to rev up massive, and it was almost like a perfect storm that all these things were coming and combining together at that time. Was that a fair comment to say?
I think it probably is, Rick, because at that time, one is the UK revenue had gone down from sales. Sales weren't happening, so obviously losses. Record companies were suffering losses. Pirating. I can't remember. I think going around to Movie Box, and I was chatting with Shabir one day, and I says, what? And he showed me Rick. He pulled out 2 CDs and he put them in my hand. He goes, "Now, Polly, you tell me which is original, which is a fake." And I was looking now. I had a good look for about 5 minutes, and I says, I can't tell. He says, "Well, this one's a fake. This one's the original." He said, "But here's all my originals sitting here in my shop because people are returning them because they can't sell them. But the fake ones are people are just, corner market, wherever. And then what also happened is a lot of our, once again, I don't want to name names, but a lot of our own record retailers, once they got their computers in, they realized they could burn off copies as well. So you could get an original, say, for £10, or you could have a burned copy for £5. So even they was kind of like, knocking out.
In on it,
yeah, of course. So all of these impacts kind of like, and then obviously, like you said, Punjab kind of like all of a sudden started hitting back in a big way with a lot of music. And all they'd done is they'd listened to the UK market, probably spoke to some of the producers over here, seen them performing out there, picked up the techniques of what we're doing over here and started reproducing it over there. And if you compare, even now, if you want to do a video, right, you can spend $5,000 here in the UK, right? But for $5,000 in India, you can probably do an album of videos. Yeah. So it's massive different. And then if you look at the quality as well that's coming from their videos in India, they're almost like short stories.
Yeah, it's everybody's kind of raised the game in terms of in comparison to now. It's just gauging that temperature, the vibe at that time, because even in that short time when I was working with you, I was kind of advertising some of the gigs. We had a great laugh going. Like I said, like you interviewing Anil Kapoor, that was a mad one. That
was absolutely crazy. I remember that.
The funny, I was with the next, because you said to me, like get the sort of the deck, and I was just playing. I played Grassroots, the whole album from start to finish, because I didn't know what I was doing. I had Dr. Zeus with me, and he was giving me a CD. I just put on his whole album. It was a crazy time. There wasn't like a structure in there. I mean, but from what you did at that point, and then I would say you made one of the most graceful kind of exits out of the radio at the time. And I remember calling you on your last day, and I was on air and had a chat. How did you know that was enough? Like, you did your time, because I think you did about 20 years there, didn't you?
It was 20 years. I mean, 20 years for me. Once again, when I think about it, that's 2 decades, but 20 years, click of a finger and it's gone. But the time came is when, people will say, I didn't want to leave. Now, let me just say, I want to get that on record, because people think I've left. I didn't want to leave that show. Yeah, that show, I don't know how to do that show for me, Rick, on a Saturday. Didn't matter how tired I was, how worn out I was. Leaving here, Derby, Saturday morning, put almost like a spring back into my step every Saturday. And I loved that show. It was mine, something I'd conjured together. The way that the 3 hours went, the 3 hours flew by it almost felt like 45 minutes to me. That's what it felt like. And people, the listeners loved it. And the thing is sometimes, occasionally, you'd get passing listeners as well. We're traveling, and they just
weddings. We used to get the shout outs on the wedding. We're going to this wedding.
You'd get their shout outs, but then they'd also, Baji, we're listening to your show, and I'm from so and so. We got nothing like this in. Could you do one? And you're like, nah, not really, but glad you can join us today. Hope you enjoy it. Go about and tell your friends about us. And so Radio XL was brilliant for me. I'll probably, had things worked out a bit better for me, I'd probably still been there, Rick, to be honest with you. But like I said, a lot of differences between myself and the management there. And I think they didn't appreciate what they had. And because they couldn't appreciate what they had, that really kind of like forced my hand. Because I did announce that I would leave a year before I actually left. And believe it or not, on the day I'd actually left, the guy, the head of Radio XL was still texting me to say, we'll do this for you, we'll do that for you. And I said, you had a whole year to do it, and you couldn't be bothered to. So what is the point now? You've kind of like left it too late. Because even on the last day, they were saying to me, well, don't announce it. Don't announce that you're leaving. But I said, look, I've announced it a year ago, so I'm not going to make myself look like a fool just because of you, the way you run your business and stuff. So, and that was it. But I think for me now, when I look back, I'm glad I got out of that station, really, because it was starting to have a bit of a negative impact on me, on how they kind of like treated me, how they saw me. I remember while I was on Radio XL, Dips Bhangra invited Saty and myself to go and do an interview on his show. So we went on to the Asian network. We did, I think, a 45 minute interview with Dips. And we talked through the sort of Aaj Kal. And when I got back to Radio XL the following Saturday, I'd got an email from the management there saying, you didn't even mention Radio XL once while he was on the Asian network. And then I emailed them back. I says, you may think that I've only got a career here at Radio XL, but I've actually got a career that predates Radio XL. And we went on to the Asian network, which is a BBC station, to talk about a BBC show. It had nothing to do with my commercial radio station career or anything. I didn't speak about the television I'd done, anything. We just spoke about the Aaj Kal show. So I said, maybe you guys need to do a bit of, reading up on where I've come from and who I really am in the industry. And so, a lot of disagreements in the end. And I've met them since, and I still, be honest with you, I'll say hello to them, but there's nothing else I would ever say to them. And, and now when I think about it, I've got no regrets, because not going to Radio XL on a Saturday gave me a bit of my life back, which I was missing out on.
Yeah, because I remember when we used to talk about Man United, it used to be only at the show, but I used to, and I think, the preparation that you used to put in it, having a playlist written, having it all down, signed up, and then you used to record the show and then listen back to it to make kind of improvements repeatedly every week. Yeah. That side of the stuff in terms of work ethic and preparation, is that what people need to kind of appreciate what was being being done behind there, and it was all for everybody else and not necessarily even for yourself.
No, it was. I mean, you think to listen back to your own show. If I've done a 3-hour show, you're literally listening back to 3 hours of radio on your own. But I've always been myself. I've always been my own biggest critic. Always. I can quite easily, if you gave me a show, say from from Radio XL, and played me through it, I could probably rip it apart and give it you back and say that's what needs to improve. And I've always been quite comfortable in criticizing myself first. I don't wait for people to say, "Oh, Polly, maybe you." I'd say, "No, that was a bad week."
Yeah.
And I always used to know in the first 10 minutes of starting my show at Radio XL, I always knew it was either going to be a good show or a bad show. Those first 10 minutes on any show I do, whether it's BBC or Radio XL, or even if I'm doing a live set, I know in the first 10 minutes how it's going to go, because I just get that feeling of, this is a good day. No, this is a bad day. And of course, being on radio, you do have your bad days, but you still turn up to try and do what you.
I just want to highlight a couple of things, like some of my memories of you. One, you needed a hernia. you were paid for a long time. I remember that one.
Oh my God! I tell you something. I can remember, while I had my hernia op, before I had my hernia op, and I hadn't been out and met my mates for quite a while, and they said, "Oh look, we obviously they knew I was waiting for an operation, and they said, look, just pop out. You don't have to have an alcoholic drink or anything. Just come out." And I said, "You know what? I'll go on then." Because I hadn't been out in ages, and I thought, I miss, because I'm not, when you
of course, you need that reset.
So I went out with them on a Saturday night, and we got to this I think it was Revolution, and they was all drinking away, and I'd been on soft drinks up to that point, and they said, "Listen, don't have like a shot or a beer or anything, but have there's alcohol pop drinks."
Yeah, the smaller kind of,
and I was like, and I said, oh, you know what? Go on. What's the worst it can do to me? That's what I thought. One drink, and you know what? I had not even half of that, half a bottle. I was doubled up in pain because it just triggered something inside, and I was actually lying outside Revolutions, curled up in a ball, and they was like, "What the hell happened to you?" I says, "Just get me in a taxi and send me home." And they was like saying, "Should we take you to hospital?" And I was like, "You can take me to hospital, but I know what the hospital are going to say. They're just going to say, you're on a waiting list for an operation, so you wait. There's nothing we can do now." Because I wouldn't get an emergency operation on it. So I just came home and that was it. So, but yeah, obviously I carried on doing the show all the way up to.
Even I always, and you used to hold your side as you were speaking. Other one, just for you to verify this.
Yeah.
When we went to a record label, and we've already kind of mentioned them, and they used to give you kind of vocals, and you gave me some Surindra Shinda, like Gulliya, to say, Rico, what do you reckon you could do with this? And I had no idea. And it's part of the same deal. Someone else had already made this album, and they're stick your face on it. Can you confirm that actually happened, right?
Yeah, it did. It did. I used to get loads of vocals, sometimes unmixed masters, as they call them. And they'd have vocals on them from various artists. I don't want to, once again, not naming anyone, but or not naming any record company, but sometimes, I would be listening to music that's probably going to be released not for another year, and always looking for new ideas, new producers, new ways of getting mixes done. I can remember even sitting in studios and I would say co-producing some tracks. Giving them, say, no, don't do that. Let's try it this way. I can remember a real famous track that I was part of remixing because I gave them the idea of it. Once again, no name. I can't mention the names and stuff, but I just gave them the idea. I says, look, it was well, I could tell you it was a Bollywood track, and this Bollywood track had really done well. So this record label, as part of their package of working with people in India, they managed to get this track, and they was thinking of actually remixing it in a sort of a Bollywood flavor. And I said, why the hell are you even? I said, make it into a Punjabi track. Use the hook line, and put a nice little beat to it. I says, you've got a Punjabi track all the way. And they was like, you're joking. I said, no. We put it together.
See, that was the era of when Ghost Production started coming more and more into it as well.
Yeah, there's so many albums and artists out there who have got Ghost Production, and I know one of the culprits of Ghost Production. But
so you know when you kind of reflect on your 40-year career, let's put it this way, what's the what's your opinion of the scene right now? Is it so? I'll kind of pretext that. I really struggle to identify myself with it. I like the kind of hip hop, Bhangra, Panjabi folk band. That's my taste of music, and I would always go to there first. The newer stuff, I fight myself. Yeah, I battle myself to try and listen to it, even though I want to support the cause as much of it. What as a veteran of it yourself, what's your opinion?
I suppose the difficulty in it's almost like how would I say it's kind of like music keeps moving on, doesn't it? It's even like when I told you when we first used to listen to radio, what that format of radio was. Then came along sort of our generation, we've moved it on. Now there's another generation. And as for music, it's still that same sort of journey. So music now is geared up. It's purely targeting just the youth. Whereas before, I think our music, it never had like a sort of a, like if you say like a target audience of 18 to 25. Yeah. Even if you think about A.S. Kang, right? He first started singing in the 70s, and then when he released Giovanni and he did the Bulia, doesn't matter how old, everyone identified with it. If you was young, whether you was parents, grandparents, there was bits of it you identified with it. And I do think a lot of our music from that time, that's the thing it's always had. It's appealed across the ages, you know, Balvinder Safri, Malkit Singh, Chirag Bachchan, DCS, all of these bands, Apna Sangeet, you could carry on naming, they've always had an appeal right across the sort of, from young to parents to grandparents, and the whole family a whole family could listen to an album. Now, that music now, Rick, you know, if you're of a certain age, you'll listen to it. I mean, some of the stuff now my son listens to, I probably wouldn't listen to. So it's creating that sort of a bit of a... There's some of the stuff I have. I'm not saying it's all bad. Yeah, some of it is... There's some good tunes out there. I mean, yeah, Sidhu Moosewala. I've got a few of his tunes, which I really like.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a tune he's releasing tomorrow.
Yeah.
About Hari Singh Nalwa. I'm really interested in hearing that. Yeah. Obviously, this is after he's passed away, but obviously it was pre-recorded and it's going to be released. So I really want to hear that. You know, the sort of the new sort of look on Hari Singh Nalwa, who of course was a general of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's army. So there are some good elements still there. There's still some bits of it I can connect to and I can feel it, but there's a lot of it I don't connect to and I don't feel it.
Do you feel
I don't
like, you know, you just talked about like Sidhu.
Yeah.
And if you look at some of the people who've passed away this year, like with Safri,
Safri, Taz,
yeah, we like, has it got you in a more reflective mood in terms of thinking about, you know, around music and how you identify yourself in there? Musically,
they're big losses for the industry, and that's how I see it. It's for the industry and obviously the fans that these artists have got. Yeah, Sidhu Moosewala, massive following globally, and I think that's reflected, hasn't it, by people, you know, passing on their condolences, wanting to, you know, be part of it. You've seen mainstream artists, you know, at their gigs put up his photos.
I mean, Drake.
So you know what I'm saying? I mean, for that sort of recognition, he was huge. Yeah. Then you've got people like Safri. I mean, I was just watching some videos from India today. They've done tributes to Safri in India. Yeah, they're singing his song Putra Darande and stuff like that. The daytime gig the other day, Pardesi did a tribute to him as well, and to Sardul Skandar, of course, another massive loss for the industry. DJ Ace early last week, Devinder Khalsi from Apna Sangeet, the double A player. Yeah, these are all people, how they call it, they're like my extended family. So it's a bit of a personal loss, but from the industry point of view, they're massive losses because a lot of their stuff isn't documented. Safri's his journey is not documented anywhere. So those Skandar, his journey, Taz, yeah, there's people who know pieces of him. I mean, I've known Taz since the beginning. You know, his Johnny Z days. And we was the first ones to interview him, and what kind of character he was then, and how he sort of he was the guy that could reinvent himself time and time again until he got to this stage of now where he was Taz and he was global. But yet when we met him and we chatted, it was almost like two guys from the Bronx meeting up and just catching up because I hadn't seen you in years, man. So what you've been up to, and that was it. Our talk was not about, you know, you're a big superstar, you're this, you're that. And Taz never, ever spoke like that to me, you know, or come across to say, look, I'm a massive world superstar now. So no, we would sit down, we'd have a beer and we would chat just like two guys. And if anyone ever saw us talk, it wouldn't be like, oh, these guys. No, we'd just like anyone sitting in a pub having a chat with a mate. And that's what it was like. And that's what I've always had with all of the sort of industry is I've had that sort of relationship with them where I can chat to any one of them as a friend, and we can talk about music. And you know, even like I said, this Saturday I was there with Pardesi, Prem Mijol was there, and Atma from Geet the Mega Band. They was there, and our chat was friendly. The musicians who played, you know, it's like they're mates, extended family. It's not about, oh, you know, you're in this band, or you're so for me it is. I'm kind of like, how do you say it? It's almost like I'm right in the middle of
the common denominator with a lot of things in it,
and a lot of them. I mean, even now, you know, I mean, some of the younger guys who are starting to get to know me now, and they're sort of appreciating stuff which I appreciate that they're giving me some respect. Some of the younger DJs out there are showing me a lot of respect, which is good. But then, when people talk about, well, are you probably stuck in the 80s? And I said, nah, because I don't mind. If someone's producing something good and it sounds good to me and I like it and I think people will enjoy it, I will play it. I don't care who it is. Yeah. Whether it's a guy who's produced this in his bedroom or whether a guy has got together or a band's got together and produced something. If it's good music and I think it's good, people are going to enjoy it. I don't mind playing it. I seriously don't. So even from this modern sort of, there are songs I've picked out where I'll think, yeah, this is a good song. So give it credit where it's due. And music will live on. It'll outlive me, outlive you, Rick. It will carry on. And all I say to the next generation is try and look after what we've done for you. Yeah. The root of it is we're Panjabi and we always will be Panjabi. And some of this stuff that happens in some of the video, I'm totally against violence, totally against guns. Yeah. Totally against the abuse of or a put down of women. In some of the videos and stuff, I always say, you don't need to do that. We don't need to. We've never sort of lived on that sort of a guns, violence kind of thing before. Yes, we've always had that thing where Punjabi, sharing. Yes, I get that, but it wasn't to the point of where we'd have to point guns at each other and and do all them kind of like.
Isn't signals. That like I come from a kind of similar kind of think point from yourself in that. Isn't that just kind of the evolution part of where the music's going to, and we can't. It's going to go that way, and we're struggling to kind of pull it back. Like for example, before when you used to have phases of music, it used to have songs or like jungle where it wouldn't have a
jungle
music. But now the majority of songs coming out are having very little kind of Punjabi instruments left in it, and it's going towards the art imitates life or the other way around.
Yeah. See what the thing is now, Rick, is that no producer, no singer out there wants to take a risk of what they're doing. Yeah. So what they want to do, so if their last song was a hit, yeah, they want to try and create something that's very similar and keep it going. See, whereas in the era of albums, when you had 8 tracks, you couldn't make 8 tracks sound the same. Yeah, they had to be different. So when you pick up an album, have a listen to an album, all the songs, yes, they're produced by one band or one producer, but all the songs have got a different feel, different type, different subject matter. And now that experimental kind of, it's gone, and people are afraid. So they kind of like almost box themselves in to one thing. I'm known for this, so I've got to continue doing this again and again and again and again, to the point of where when you just know this person's releasing this song and you just think, I know what this song is going to be about, what the sound is going to be like, and that's it. Yeah. And that's where a lot of the industry, it's suffering because people aren't prepared to, think, let's try and take a risk. Let's try and do something different, take a bit of a gamble. Yeah, it may not work, but the fact is I'm giving them something different to think about. And that sort of phase will, yes, we're getting through this phase, but I still think that sooner or later, it's almost like it'll come back, that Desi stage will come back, because in essence, a lot of our entertainment is still based around like functions and parties. Yeah. Family parties, family gatherings, or a lot more dinner dances, which we never used to have in the 80s. In the 80s, it was like club gigs, but now we've got dinner dances. So when you, yeah. And so when you go to these events, you want music you can dance to. You don't want, the latest, whatever it is, or, this gangster. You can't dance to that, but you can still dance to Bullion, you can still dance to songs like Sohorote, you still got all those classics playing out there. And you'll be surprised how many bookings I get for doing old school sets.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Poli, I'm going to ask you a few more questions and then I'm going to bring it together. Otherwise, it's going to be late for school in the morning. So quick fire on off the top of my head. So Just go with the first answer.
Go on then.
It doesn't mean anything, but it's just on there.
Rapid fire. Go on.
Favorite album?
Oh gosh, man. Now there's something you have to give me here. Are we talking India-based, UK-based, or just
both?
Both. UK-based. Wow, that's a tough one. That is.
Thank you.
That's a real tough question to pin it down to one album, because I still love my 80s music.
Just go for it.
And I'll stick my neck out. I want to say Bhangra Fever 1.
Bhangra Fever 1.
Yeah.
India. What about India album?
India albums. Oh gosh, where do I start, Rick? There's too many to India to sort of pin down to a favorite, because now, with all this modern technology, I've got the facility to be able to pick out my favorite songs and just listen to them.
Okay. So I'm gonna move it on then and say favorite UK singer, favorite India-based singer.
Gosh, man, that's another tough one. I'm going to go with, for me, where it all started, I'm going to go with, from India, Yumlajat. Yeah. Because he's the man. He's the man who's given us all of this. Whatever way we look at it. I mean, the kids today may not think, now, how can he have done that? But he did it. He changed the whole scene for us. And he created the Dumbi, which is, if you listen to the majority of Punjabi tracks or Bhangra tracks, even now, they've got that one instrument still playing, and it's Dumbi. Mundia to Bachke is the classic, I will give you. Dumbi, all Dumbi, isn't it? So, yeah. Yumlajat, over here, favourite singer. Gosh, I was at the concert a few weeks ago, the one Amarjit Sidhu did, and Shin. Wow, man. You could stick him on a man, he was electric. And to think I've gone and seen some really big bands mainstream. I've seen Guns N' Roses live, U2, Simple Minds, perform live. Trying to think, I've been to Glastonbury, saw some massive bands there. But to see him live that night, you could pick him up and put him on a mainstream stage, and he would not feel out of place at all. And vocally, he's very apt. Very, very talented in his vocal range. And I'm not disregarding the other Punjabi artists from the UK. Shin.
Okay. Next question that I'm going to go for might be a little bit tricky. Give me the top 5 best producers.
It's another good one. I don't have to put them in an order, do I?
No order.
No, okay, no order. So I'm going to go Kuljit Bamra, Deepak Khazanchi.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Cam Frantic. He's done a lot of work behind the scenes that people don't even know about. And in the era of bands, when bands were together, Bardesi, their last album they did was Full Badmashi. It's another album, very underrated, but if anyone's got it, you should sit down and really listen to it again, because music in that is awesome. So them as a unit, Bardesi music. So that, how many is that? 4?
You got one more.
One more. Production wise, off the top of my head, I think I'm going to give some credit here to PMC as well. You have to, man. He's the amount of hits he's had in. Once again, you go back to, I'm trying to think, 89, 90 when he started, and we're talking 2022 now. So he's still doing stuff. So yeah, PMC as well. That's my top 5.
Smashed it. Okay, I ain't gonna ask you any more rapid fire, because I see you struggling, and you almost broke the feed that we had on here. So, with everybody who I get on, I give an opportunity to kind of either jump on a bandwagon, jump off a bandwagon, or kind of, it's a space for them to kind of get something off their chest. So, Polly, is there anything that I'm going to open that out to you at this point. Is there a bandwagon you want to jump on, off, or is there anything that you want to kind of get off your chest?
Get off my chest. I mean, if I could do all of this again, I don't think I'd want to change anything, Rick, because the way it's kind of all happened and the way it's all fallen into place. The only regret I have is that the mainstream never gave us more of an opportunity to really put our, like for instance, like reggae. Yeah, it started off as an underground sound, but eventually was recognised by the mainstream. Besides like Panjabi MC and maybe one or two other bits of music, they've never really given us the full recognition. And I can understand there's a language barrier there. Yeah, I can understand that. But yes, they've created the Asian network, but does it really reflect all of us? That's the biggest question I've got. And that's the thing is, even now, if you look at the Asian communities, the Asian community in London is very different from the Asian community in the Midlands. So how can you have one station that reflects, and I think the BBC are probably going to go back to regional stuff now. So I don't know. There's lots of changes coming, so we'll have to wait and see. But that's what their plan is, I think. I've got no regrets, and I've got no kind of like bandwagon. I'd probably be.
Oh, that's fine.
Want to be on or not be with, but yeah, I still enjoy what I've done. I had a great time on Saturday at the daytime gig we did. I mean, it's nostalgia for me, maybe, and that's what maybe makes it so good. But I still get that adrenaline going, being part of, hosting it, making sure everything's happening, good entertainment for people. That's one thing I always believe in, is if you're doing anything out there, whether you're a band, whether you're a DJ, whether you're, hosting, whatever, make sure you give it, so people will listen to you. You are entertaining them. And that's a must for me, is entertainment of people, especially if they're paid. If you're paying £20-30 to go and see something, give a good entertainment, give a good account of yourself, so they'll remember you and come back for more, rather than walk away and think, that's one place I'm never going again, man.
Yeah. Poli, I just want to kind of bring it to a close, man, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know I gave you very little notice and kind of said it on there. I think it was only going to be that way for me, to be honest. And I just want to kind of highlight to everybody in terms of the impact that you have had on this industry and continue to do so. I learned so much from you. Like what I've already kind of said, I struggle to put it into words. You should be having a blue plaque in Derby for all the services you've done there internationally, whatever it is, like one of the underrated kind of people out there. And I think you should get your story out in a documentary or any form that you want. Start your own podcast, do all of these kind of things, because like it's going to be invaluable, and the knowledge that you've shared today is massive. So I just want to say a personal thank you from not only myself but my family. Our families know each other.
I've got respect for your family. I love them.
He was at my wedding.
Yes, I was. And
you weren't very well, though.
I wasn't very well, but because it was your wedding, I came. Anyone else's, I would have not.
No, I appreciate it, man. I know, and proper respect for you, man. So
I just want to say thank you to you for giving me this opportunity, because, like I said, not many people would give me this opportunity, really, to sort of speak in this way about the industry, about myself, about the journey and everything. So big up to you as well, Rick, for I suppose wanting to do it.
Favor.
No, hey, listen, you're like a younger brother to me. So
yeah, man.
It ain't about.
I actually look older than you now. So
no, you don't. Look at you. Ain't seen my grey hair, my bald patch, and everything, mate.
Look at this. I'm looking like a skunk, but you look good. You skinny and stuff. I'm making my way there. Oh, hey, Pop, we're gonna do this again, by the way. So like,
yeah.
We're gonna on. All right,
that'll be fine. Yeah, great, Rick. Thank you very much. Oh, before you end, all my shows on Radio XL, I've still got the recordings.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Where do you think it's going, Rick?
Where I sang Chubgila live in it.
Yeah, we've got that one as well. I've still got that. I've still got that. I've still got that. Yeah, that was one of my many memories. But what I was actually going to say is I am thinking of getting the old shows out because they're all digital. So edit them and maybe put something out there as a sort of a.
There was my ego thinking it was about me, but really it was about.
No.
This is what this guy's about.
Listen,
He's serving everyone.
That bit, you and Suki Bart.
Suki Bart.
That's got to be there, mate. You can't not have that bit in there where you're both singing, and Suki Bart does the female pieces as well. So you cannot have that.
He was playing the Dumbi as well at the same time, innit?
Yes, he was. He was. That's right. Yeah, and so but that was the
funny thing. Do you remember someone rang in tried to get us a booking? They didn't. They thought we were an actual act.
Yeah. That's right. And I took that booking.
I think
no, never. But so I'm gonna.
I think you should, man. In whatever format it can be done, just upload. And
it's digital. So like I said, I don't know whether I need to start my own podcast or something.
Yeah, man.
Or whether I could maybe hook up with you somehow and we could do something together and knock some of the old shows out there.
That'd be brilliant.
It'd be good.
All right, man. Catch up with you.
Big up, Rip. Yeah.
United.
All the way, mate. All the way.